I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Teakink podcast. Today we have Deborah Sims, the current keeper of the Museum of Sex Objects, a pop-up space that I visited recently that I truly adore. How long has the Museum of Sex Objects been around?
Well, it first showed to the public, actually, where are we now? 2019, this last weekend, actually, because it was open house weekend. And, you know, it's so hard. In fact, I think it's getting harder for people to engage in authentic stories about sexuality. But I thought I'm just going to send something to the National Trust and say, you know, I'd like to open up my flat, which is a tiny flat in Covent Garden, as part of the open house weekend. And I will take guided tours around it. I mean, it is tiny, but basically, and it's pretty eccentric because I had my red cape of of the position of the keeper that has to wear, and meeting people on the end of the street and then bringing them around. I did have some objections to it even then, because it's just never-ending objections to something, because I'm talking about sexuality. One of my neighbours tried to stop me from contacting the council and saying, we don't want this. I think, goodness me, it's just so...
Do they understand what the objects are? What are the objects?
The objects are a plethora of different things, the different mediums, in ceramics or papier-mâché or mixed media, all different things that I suppose the earliest piece that discusses sexuality in Roman period is one of your favourites.
My favourite.
It's called the Meretrix whip. And that discusses how the sex industry worked in the Roman period, which was highly organised, but the women, or I'm not quite sure if it was men, but I think it was the Meretrices were the top of the order, which we would call the hierarchy. They worked in all the pleasure palaces. The main pleasure palace in London at that time would be round about where St Paul's is now. And they were from high-born families. And I don't suppose really, but the families, they couldn't do anything about it. If you decided you wanted to be a Meretrix, there was nothing they could do about it. They could try and lock you up, I guess, and stop you from going. But basically, I think also, it was seen differently. It wasn't probably seen at that point as being something fully desirable, but it wasn't also so bad that so you paid imperial taxes, which is the most important thing to keep the empire going, of course. And so you would go to the edict at Cripplegate in the city and give your working name, and then you would pay imperial taxes and go and do interesting things in the pleasure palace by St Paul's. But what I thought was really interesting about it was that there's really hardly anything, written about this one aspect of it, which was that they were required to bleach their hair, to have blonde hair. This is throughout the whole of the Roman Empire. There was over 100 different concoctions for bleaching hair. Some had some very adverse effects, as you can imagine. We think that this relationship to having bleached hair and maybe some sexual availability is to do with the blonde-haired sex trade that started around about this time of bringing all the young boys and women from the north of the empire that had bleached hair. It was very, very desirable. And there's even an account of Pope Gregory in the slave market in Rome, inquiring after the origins of a beautiful blonde haloed young boy, of course. Somebody says to him, "Oh, he's an angel," and Pope Gregory fawns, saying he's an angel. So we're not quite sure if this is why this bleached hair became a symbol of the Meretrix. But that idea of sexual availability and bleached hair, it's still relevant today. It's still read in the same way, even though, we're in 2 millennia on, it's still a patent symbol. So we have objects. I guess the main point of the museum is to reconfigure history, especially around sexuality. For me, sexuality is a way of seeing what a particular society is all about. I think it's a very good and relevant way of understanding, the freedoms of the body, I guess, in a society. And I think that's what interests me the most, and that's why the museum exists. Yes. So the first time I showed it was in 2019, which we got featured as one of the top places to visit in the whole of England.
Yes.
And I know it's in the middle of the Evening Standard.
Where was it at the time?
When it was in my flat.
Oh,
I was in the middle of
your flat was one of the best places to visit in England.
Anyway, so it was really, it said, because they had all these other strange museums of the cheese board.
Cheese
board.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh my God. So there was like me in my red cape with my thigh-length boots on saying, this year we have the Museum of Sex Objects with the Museum of Cheese Boards.
I mean, that sounds like a good party. But so objects such as the Meretrix from that time became a Meretrix whip,
yes,
right?
From the 4th century sort of would have been when that story would have been relevant. Yeah.
Where those blonde hairs are braided into a whip.
Yes.
And beautifully framed.
Which I have given talks, one of them online during COVID. Was at the Institute of Psychiatry in Berlin, the Brandenburg Institute. And it was so interesting talking, because I had to do it obviously online because it was during COVID, but they said they were able to choose different things to talk about, and they were looking at law and sexuality, and the professor was just fawning, absolutely obsessed by the Meretrix whip. It was, you could tell he was so excited.
I wonder why. The feel of it and also the story. I guess.
So we try to cover. I mean the stories that we really do cover, I think, are sort of like the more untold stories, which I guess because we've just had 2,000 years of the male gaze, that it is LGBTQ or female stories, and female stories I think are my major obsession.
When did you realize that was an obsession?
I think I think class and sexuality has always been an obsession for me. My second degree is a master's in psychoanalysis, history and culture, and I specialised in gender studies and visual culture. And, it's basically from doing that research, I really found so much, so many stories which actually really turned my stomach, where I sort of had to keep my anger down about them. So that's basically, and that was about 10 years ago. I'm just about to start a PhD at Dundee, looking at similar subjects as I've looked at before. and I just started making 2 things for the keeper to contribute to the museum, which are called demon bowls, and they're really about how the feminine, how women have been straitjacketed through the capitalist system from the late 16th century, with one being the idea of the witch, which is just a construct, particularly aimed at older women, but is a construct. And funnily enough, I was called a witch outside the Tate twice last week. And
Why? What was happening?
I have found, if you don't mind me saying this, I found it's quite interesting as I've got older. And, before, I guess, I was interested in being desired. I was interested in being desired more. I now don't give a shit. And I think this is problematic. And I think this is problematic for men my age that maybe, so it was somebody I'd known, who I'd seen briefly when I was about 20. But I find that a lot of men of my age now who basically looking at younger girlfriends, they really don't like to leave me while they go to the bar to get a drink or anything in case I corrupt. and free their girlfriends from, it's really good. I've just noticed it happening after I turned 50 maybe, or something like that, it's, it's fascinating what you start to signify when you are a free-spirited woman who doesn't give a shit about being desired. And in a way, there's freedom with that, which, the keeper has great freedom to, do what she wishes in a way, but it comes at the cost of whether or not you want to fit into society and by being desired, that's now not. It's interesting because all my life that was something I was interested in,
Yeah, I think it becomes a version of, so if I'm thinking from my perspective, I think the way that I am is very also clashing with overarching ideas of what desirability is, right? It's too assertive, otherwise known as forceful. It's too much, basically. And it's not that people aren't desirous of it, whether we're older, whether we're more assertive. It's more that they're afraid to be. And so I feel like that comes out in all sorts of strange ways, like calling you a witch, or maybe like being really angry. But this weird, I often get a lot of men who are angry to meet me. It's like,
instead of shaking hands again, I'm pleased to meet you, I'm angry to meet you.
They're just like, they don't know how to interact with you. They're kind of enraged by your existence when they hear that you're a dominatrix, but at the same time, they're not going away. So it's interesting. It's like people are all just playing this game they think they need to be playing, I think.
I think that is really interesting. This space of the imagination and in parallel to the social norms of what you're supposed to, say or do on a daily basis. And I think there's a clash there. That's a space that interests me. There.
And so
we've been all over the place.
The witch.
Well, I was just thinking today when I was listening to that single cat lady comment, what is that? That's just another way of saying a witch.
Or independent of the
But which is what a witch is.
Oh, so
in some ways, to me, the idea of what they're calling a witch today is for me somebody who doesn't want to play the game of smiling nicely, being easy to deal with, blah blah blah, which is what we're saying. If you are not that, then you are single cat lady, which means a witch in another term.
Nice link. I guess it's also the fact that the cat is more of desire than the man. Which is probably a major issue.
They didn't say single dog lady, did they? You see, a cat face is always symbolic of the familiar of a witch. So it's like you've got something. Again, it's the same sort of dynamic you're talking about. Like you've got something that interests them because they won't leave you alone. The media doesn't leave the single cat lady alone. You know, they don't leave you alone. They're obsessed by controlling your body, but that also is what enrages them. And, you know, I'm angered to meet you type of thing. It's the same thing.
Are there figures in the Museum of Sex Objects that are angered?
Besides the keeper.
Besides the keeper.
Well, I think, you know, there's a point where I guess the anger needs to be communicated in a more creative way. You know, you can't just
Rage.
No, rage continually. It's really no good for the skin. But I think like when you know, the cautery clamp, which is a little papier-mâché clamp-like shape in a dome with broken butterfly wings. This story it just was off the scale of enragement when I read in the Wellcome Trust, the library there, about Baker Brown is his name, Dr. Baker Brown, who was the head of the Medical Association in the mid-19th century. So he had a really high position, and he opened up in the leafy suburbs of Notting Hill the hospital for women. Because again, this is the 19th century with, you know, the start of psychoanalysis and trying to understand. There became many ways of controlling the woman rather than, you know, keeping her indoors or making sure that she is only seen in polite society, or, you know, to the middle classes, you weren't allowed to go out, which is where most of Baker Brown's patients would have come from, the middle classes. So, basically, if you showed an inclination to liking the same sex, if you were caught masturbating, I guess if you just really wanted to be a little bit wild and answer back or not smile, or all the things that we're saying that society still requires from a woman, or you know, fell in love with somebody from the wrong class, as I said, or, you know, masturbation, whatever it would be, or you just didn't want to do tapestries anymore, you know. Then,
Tapestried out.
Yes, and then you would be classed as having hysterical symptoms. And so it gave a new way of, a new form of, a new form of torture, in a way, to apply to the female body, which was, you know, the clitoridectomies, the removal of women's clitorises, as being thought of as the form of all this, you know, malpractice, you know, of the female behaviour of the time, you know, that they were not allowed to have any of these freedoms. But so the families would send them there. I mean, unfortunately, this went on for about 5 or 6 years. And because the middle classes were too, you know, their position was so fragile in society, as they were just the new bourgeoisie, and they didn't want to show that anybody in their family, and only the women they couldn't control or were, you know, sort of mentally ill, or basically just wanted to be themselves. So it went on for so long because nobody wanted to say anything about it. And so he continued this hideous practice where, you know, people think, you know, female circumcision is a foreign body, it belongs somewhere else. But in fact, you know, 100 years ago, just under 100 years ago, it was still happening here. In Notting Hill. And, you know, so I think the rage from that story, you know, you know, one of his victims has made a piece which, you know, with the poignant.
I know, it's a tough word.
Butterfly leaves, broken
Yeah.
butterfly leaves at the bottom, which sort of is a way of telling that story through an object that I think is really powerful. Actually in, film, one of my favourite films I loved, which really caused a lot of problems.
What happens in it?
I might have to just have a quick look. Sorry,
Go on.
I didn't. The one that came out earlier this year, that there was such some people absolutely loved it, some people absolutely hated it.
Was it
Bella? Bella. She was the main character in it.
Oh, Normal People.
No, Bella.
No, I don't know.
You do. It's again,
Oh yes, Poor Things.
Poor Things. Thank you. Sorry,
yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So in that, she gets out of the clutches of the
of
evil doctor
one.
who's about to because that. And so, that manifested in some awful behaviour. And then you have psychoanalysis with all the hysterical symptoms of women. And, now I think we're back into another dangerous territory again. Even with the single cat lady. I mean, single cat ladies are now coming out and standing up for themselves. But that is also linked to the overturning of Roe versus Wade in America. And every time, society is scared, the, female body is always a battleground.
So through the research that you've seen, through the objects that exist, have you seen patterns of this fear and this desire for control over female bodies? Are there patterns?
I think there will be patterns. I don't think, when we look at patterns, it's not like they're geometric and they all follow a certain every 30 years. Yes, we could have the armies ready. But I think it's always when there is, chaos. Underlying chaos, like now we have the performed democracy. Whether this is now democracy or not is another issue, but so everybody knows that it's the performance of democracy and there's something crumbling underneath. And every time there's a change, like we were talking earlier, like at the end of the 16th century when we were entering into the modern era and, getting rid of all the old ways and folk tales and etc. and ideas of which, the witches were just like healers or the lady who lived at the edge of society by the forest who used herbs or whatever. When with modern society happening, then there was wanting the masculine was wanting to control medicine, controlling again, always controlling the body, and how people even give birth now is so controlled by the masculine. It's not a feminine domain at all. So every time there is disruption or again with industrialization, there became really bad control of the female body in the Victorian times. And when, there's underlying fear, the female body is always... So I think this Roe versus Wade overturn, even though that's in America, we seem to follow everything that happens. And I think we should be very, very cautious of this. I think it's backfired in many ways, but I never thought in my lifetime that would ever happen. And this, again, friction between women also happens at the same time, because we are always pitted against each other. So, many of the witch trials in England, anyway, were women bringing other women to trial, because we're always pitted against each other, which is what is now happening now between, the idea of a trad wife and also even in feminist theory, the anti-sex worker, the pro-sex worker, or, we should all just forget about anti-pro and we should just all come together to, and because all this pitting against each other is also, it all comes from the patriarchal system, and I think we are being pitted against each other.
As a way to disrupt any potential
separate, divide and disrupt, and that's what's happening everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So. And you think that women's bodies are some of the things to first be attacked because it's still within a patriarchal framework?
We are always the battlefield. It's I think the overturning of the abortion law was a signifier of what's to come. I mean, that's what all Handmaid's Tale is about. Well, it's always the battlefield. When you can't control what's going on, you then want to control the female body.
Why do you think that is the target?
Well, because we live in, a patriarchal system. We have done for millennia, and when that is in chaos or threatened, I mean, on a micro scale, it's what happens within a household. If the father figure is feels under attack and doesn't have any work, or is it feels castrated, shall we say, then he will lash out at whoever is there, which is going to be his wife, which we know when there's always football matches that if England don't win, there's a great number of domestic violence cases called in. So on a larger scale, that's how society is. And if you talk about the idea of feeling that you have this conflicting idea of men being angry, scared, but also attracted to, a way of denying that attraction is to control.
Hence the system.
Hence, yes.
Hence the system, and hence retaliations and educations such as the things that you've created.
100%. We need to, that's my whole thing, is for people to understand where these stories have come from. And then, we are not in isolation. We are within a bigger structure of history. And I think it's important for people to understand their history. It might seem like an old-fashioned way of being, but I think it would be like waking up every day on a personal level and not remembering anything about who you were. So you go and burn your hand in hot water. You do all these silly things again. It's really important. Like when you were talking about patterns, I guess what I see with history is a way of, a red flag system of thinking, well, this is where this came from. So now I can see how this could happen again. And, and also it's a way for, like, I've got my slut faming t-shirt
I need one. I'm going to ask where you got that later.
So, it's why did I come to this? I know, because I was just thinking about, it's a way of, contextualizing yourself within a historical past, because some other things that I love are the dominatrixes in history, which I am just in awe of. I think they're fantastic. Like the woman in white that has the little music box, who was called the Mistress of the Whip, and her name was Madame Hauteville, and she just dressed head to tail in white with a white modesty veil and white shoes with diamonds on, and people would book her up months in advance. She was the most specialized mistress of the whip. But at the same time, at the end of the 18th and early 19th century, these they were the influencers of the day, and they would go to the pleasure gardens, and they would wear different configurations of flowers within their bosom to denote their specialities. And they would be thronged by admirers, and and so they would be
slut famed.
They would be slut famed, and they would be really, there was that division again, the division in society, this division of, the strict Victorian. I mean, what society that can't look at a turned table leg and feel turned on? You've got problems, don't you? So you're suppressing, and then it's all, sort of exploding on the other side. So I think repressing sexuality is a really bad thing in general. I think it's best just to let's all, as long as you are in control of what, and you're not harming or you're not doing, I don't see what the problem is with any of it.
Was there a period of time in the UK where sexuality was celebrated?
Well, I don't know enough about the ancient. I would say, because most of the ancient belief systems are matriarchal systems, that throughout Europe, there were, sexuality was seen as, or even having sex in the temple as a holy experience. So there would have been lots of sex cults that would have been thought of as being sacred. But as far as I would say, I don't know enough about that. But as far as tracing sexuality and sexual history, my personal thing is the 18th century, because for the first time, I'm interested in class and how class has impeded the sexual imagination, because I normally start off my talks by saying we're not going to talk about, the aristocracy, because they have had millennia to develop a sexual imagination, because they're never going to get arrested. They own their own properties. They've got space. They can pay for whatever they want, or they can take whatever they want.
Because they have the freedom for creativity. They
would never have, they would, like the Hellfire Club, they would never have been prosecuted for anything. So when in the 18th century, the spanking houses of Covent Garden come into their own, and they were thronged all around the outside of the piazza. And what I loved about the idea of flagellomania, as it was called, is that it went across class and gender. It went just England was known as like London, the spanking capital, because it was something that they thought was in the British temperament in some way or another. And so it was so popular to be spanked that a guy called Charles Pence, I think in 1810, had developed spanking paddles with a handle that you turned here that spanked 40 bottoms at a time, because there wasn't enough people to spank the amount of bottoms that needed spanking.
This was in a public space?
It was in a spanking house in Covent Garden. So you would probably have had to have paid, I don't know the price of getting in there. But that was on an industrial scale and
bent over with 39 other people.
Have
this thing turned.
That's community for you.
I guess when the Museum of Sex Objects has a large enough space, that's an object to hunt down.
I think we should have a reenactment.
Do you have plans for a space for?
Oh, I would love to have a space. I'm hoping some of my benefactors might come forward and help me, because unlike the Museum of Sex in New York, which is, that's a commercial venture, my main passion is to tell the stories, so we get a bit more balance on our history and on our future. I hope in that. So I would love to. Let's wait and see. At the moment, I've just set up a community investment, a CIC. So I went to try and get a bank account for the Museum of Sex Objects CIC yesterday only, and honestly, the amount of kerfuffle, it's really shocking though, because it's just ridiculous. One person came back to me and said, this is very high risk. I said, I'm not sure what you're talking about. You know, this is to tell women's stories, LGBT stories, you know, in a historical, creative manner. And, you know, what is it? The word there. And I said, what?
Sex.
Honestly, I feel that we might not only just be talking about the female body, but being under threat. But what the hell is going on? I mean, when I just said about, you know, a turned chair leg could excite somebody so much that it would have to have a little cover on it. I mean, the fact that you cannot show a nipple, you know, it's another sign of like repression. And, you know, to an extent that there's something going to explode in another way. You know, I think it's like absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do love the nipple one because at some point most people have sucked on it.
Well, of course they have.
It was necessary.
But also, it's a way of policing the body again through the male gaze or through a patriarchal system. So, I mean, like, when I was younger, nobody cared. I mean, the fact is, you would, I mean, it's changed throughout the whole of Europe, but, you know, in the 1980s, everybody would be topless throughout the whole of Europe. On all the beaches, it would be the done thing. Nobody would think twice about it. And that's even on English beaches. And now it's like, oh my God, you know, people look at you as if you're, you know, as if you've, you know, come from a ghost from the 1970s or something. Oh my God, it's like titillation, literally titillation.
The patterns. And so that's only been, what, 40 years now, so.
Well, this suppressing of the nipple is due to puritanical bots, you know, being programmed by emos in Silicon Valley
Recently.
You know? So it's strangely named, aptly named Silicon Valley.
True. So a space for the Museum of Sex Objects. And I mean, when I first came to the pop-up that you had, you told stories about every single piece. Would that be something that you would have to do going forward? I guess it could be programmed into something. I guess, what is like this vision? I know that you give tours.
I can be programmed into.
I know.
Into a bookkeeper.
I mean, you're not going to be there all the time, right?
Oh my God, I don't know. I'm pretty obsessional.
You can live there.
Or maybe
finally moving from Covent Garden.
Yeah, actually, Covent Garden would be the ideal place. I know you were going to say something. You said art direction, so.
Oh, maybe, but I guess I'm interested in the storytelling aspect of it.
Everything for me is about storytelling. But when I came in, you said something about art direction. I think we were going to talk about Coco de Mer.
Yeah. When you used to be...
I was the creative director that put it together, and I even wanted it in Covent Garden because of the richness of the storytelling, because, you know, Asia Fokata had already done the 1950s Soho's definitely. And I just thought it's interesting to bring in more complex stories from the 18th century, which for me, you know, are just, you know, the wild halcyon days of sexual freedom to a certain extent, shall we say, you know, but, you know, the fact that you could be a mistress of the whip and walk around and you know, and actually have throngs of people being interested in you as a person, you know, is freedom to a certain extent, I think. But I chose Covent Garden. I wanted it to be in Covent Garden because of those histories of Covent Garden, as you know, the
spanking houses.
Well, also the you know, there was the Covent Garden Ladies. That was put together just, I think, of Longacre somewhere, that book. And it was, even though it was produced, the books come out as men, it was the women who, the sex workers from that area who got the stories, who put them in and then it went under, he compiled it, but it's actually the women that put that together. So it's always, and it's, or the licentious behaviour of all the gin palaces and everything that went on then. I mean, that's where I feel that I liked. I would like. I mean, to me, it seems when I think about the coffee houses, which sounds like really, they were not like Starbucks. They were like everybody who spilled out of any of the brothels or the any of the nightlife that London offered at that time, would all go and stand outside a coffee house, which was in Covent Garden by the Piazza, which was all like ramshackle. There were some beds in there, but there was all like, the rich and the poor all drinking, like at 9 o'clock in the morning, I think it's, important for there to be a mixture of people coming together. But I was going to say that also, where were we? We were on Covent Garden. But also I was doing, which I must start up again, the Soho walking tours. Have you been on one?
I haven't, but I know of them.
Yes, they were really good fun. And I drew obscenities down alleyways and all sorts of things. And I was almost thinking, should I go and write a letter to the Evening Standard about myself, like Joe Walton did, about myself, saying, there's somebody drawing coming cocks down the alley.
So how long would this tour be? Where would it start?
Well, one of my favourite women, whether I would like her in person is another thing, but I admire her so much, was Teresa Barclay, who run the White House, which when you start my talk, it always amuses me that the White House is in Soho Square and it's now a WeWork. And I always think how funny it would be to be working late in WeWork and hearing lashings and yelps and all sorts going.
I hope you can still feel it somehow.
I just touched the walls. I get everyone to touch the walls.
Feel something on your back.
Yeah. But how amazing, because, she, obviously through sex work, you could transcend class, really much easier, I think, in the 18th century. Maybe a brief point in the 60s.
I think that still happens here in some ways. I get access to people that I would never otherwise come across in my social circles.
Yes,
right?
but also there's that wonderful account of where the countesses and duchesses meeting at Prince Regent's Ball and going, when would we three whores meet again? Because they'd become countesses. So that social mobility was able to happen, I think, more in the 18th century and in the 60s.
Also because there were more levels to climb, I guess.
I think there's sort of, there comes more of a shutdown, I feel, in the Victorian times, maybe with the rise of the bourgeoisie who want to keep everything in order to protect their position. Yeah. So they're more scared, like there's that wonderful account of the summer exhibition in Paris where Manet shows Olympia, that wonderful painting of Olympia, which was a common name for a sex worker in Paris at the time. And, she's directly staring out of the canvas and confronting. And it was so shocking because it's the first time that the bourgeoisie, the women who were, kept in cages more or less, were not allowed out to do anything on their own ever, and had to do the tapestries and blah, blah, blah. And, they were invited to the summer exhibition with their husbands walking around, and then all of a sudden their husbands' lives of their experience of Olympia staring out and confronting the middle-class women at the time. It was so shocking. I think the splits in society are what causes most of the problems in society, really.
And where we are right now.
Where are we right now? You could be the modern Olympia. I think looking out.
I know I have images of me all over this space, but it was more from a time when I couldn't import anything into Bali. And I didn't want just wooden carvings. So I printed photos of myself in latex.
I love it.
Yeah. The modern Olympia. I guess in some ways that's what sex workers and people who are engaged with their sexuality in a monetizational kind of way.
Yes, but you know, I have a problem.
Yeah.
My problem I have, and it, you know, some people don't like me for saying this, is I don't understand. I don't know, maybe it's just who I am. I don't understand the difference between, because I have friends who probably wouldn't be that, can't really understand what I'm doing sometimes with sex work and think, oh, you know, what is this about? I don't think they quite get it. But then they live in, you know, they are provided for in a marriage where they don't want to have sex particularly, have everything that they could possibly want, and then perform sex acts that they don't, you know, that they're not really wanting to initiate or do. So I don't understand. Everything has a compensatory feature to it. Mm-hmm. But then, and so I don't think you should ever look down on anybody for anything to do with that, because I do think, you know, I don't understand. I mean, that might seem...
No, I think sex work has definitely made me understand the transactional nature of social interaction.
Yeah.
And where the placement of marriage in sexual giving and taking versus an independence around it. I think it's when a woman takes that financial independence for themselves that's more the issue. Then
when you say more the issue,
it's more the issue. So somebody who's within a socially acceptable framework, such as a marriage that is exchanging sexuality for financial security, that's a very long played out game. Right?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it wouldn't work
normalized
for me.
it. Everyone's normalized it to the extent that it just happens and nobody really talks about it. But a woman saying, actually, my sexuality is mine and I'm going to monetize that as and when I see fit, I think that's far too much independence.
I think that's very honest.
I think that's the issue for people, though. They just don't want that freedom,
because then again, it's about that split in society. Again, it's the same thing of, you know, one of my favourite things is T.S. Eliot. Sorry, but anyway, humanity can't stand too much reality. And I think that when, you know, you open up something for discussion, or you know, in a way, the people that I'm talking about would probably think sex work wasn't, you know, a good thing. But then I think that's another split of not wanting to recognise what one has to do. Yeah. So I think this split in society, sometimes the split is not so powerful and life's okay. I think sometimes, as I believe we are moving up to, you know, sort of like some Lord of the Rings battle, you know, for our, you know, just because of all these, I mean, the rise in, you know, anti-female behaviour has, you know, really Richter scaled, hasn't it? Really, I mean, who would have thought about these Tates would even have had followers? Who would have thought? I mean,
it's also the dissemination of information. I think how things are spread and ideas are spread 100%. And taken without thought. I think that there's just a lot of things that suddenly come together. So
100%,
the importance of storytelling of the kind and thoughtful and wider natured
is more important than ever.
But like, how do all of these platforms then take that into account? How do we make it a part of something that's important for all of us to understand, to be educated upon? This is
meaningful.
A huge question, right?
We need more meaning, I think.
Yeah. It's a whole reframing of how these technologies work and how we start to perceive or levels of importance of information, because people like to be enraged. They like that it drives them to keep scrolling. But how, like, what is it that we can do to make it so that something more useful for all of us is going to keep somebody engaged? Like, what is that tipping point? Is it the Museum of Sex Objects?
I would say so, Eva.
I think so.
Because when you were saying that, you have the idea of censorship immediately. Whatever you do, you have an idea of censorship. If you're going to be doing it from the point of scrolling or whatever you're doing now on a gadget of whatever description, then that is censorship. Then who is going to be doing that? And we're back to the bots, we're back to the black nipples, or we're back, where are we with that? So my feeling when you were talking is that it has to be started at a much earlier point, which is education, so that people can start thinking before they do that, or they recognize something as nonsense or not something they want to engage in. So it's very complex, isn't it?
Yeah, like I've had to even, I had a very heavy practice of meditation for a while. And I think that's something that really helps me with all the social media stuff, because I can watch myself thinking and reacting, and I'm scrolling for too long. And
you're
why
becoming
is that?
aware.
Yeah.
You've got awareness.
But to do that takes a lot of work in this day and age. It took me sitting for hours and hours and hours, like practicing this way of paying attention. It's not easy.
No.
We're not given that opportunity.
No, and I think that's the other thing is that anything that is worth doing, you do have to practice. It's not easy, and unfortunately, we're living in a world that has given the mythology of, oh, this is easy, you can do this, you can do that. No, you can't. And actually, it's the journey that's the most important, and all the things that you do and learn while you're on that journey is what makes you now a better person, And I think it's really important that we're not scared of pain, and we can contain our own pain, or we can contain sometimes the pain of others without getting, without fear. I think it's, because there is a point where in all these, in meditation or anything, any practice, like I'm an obsessive researcher, but you can't just keep researching because it's the same as scrolling. You have to then take that and make it into an argument, and you're thinking, oh my God, shall I just go and wipe the surfaces, or shall I go, whatever it is, because I can't contain that pain. There's a certain pain in that, and there is no pleasure without the pain, and that again, there's that sort of balance in Lacan, Jacques Lacan, Lacanian theory. It's called jouissance, and it's the point of, there's a point where pleasure is pain and pain is pleasure. It's the same. And to be able to contain that and hold that without freaking out.
It's freedom.
Yeah. Yes. We've got it. Yeah.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you for giving us a small moment into yourself and the Museum of Sex Objects and how things have come together. And I would love to talk more about how that can become a reality for more people to experience.
Oh my God, thank you, Eva.
Figure that out.